Here's everything you need to know about sinking. Sinking as a status is extremely similar to rupture, in the sense that when hit, the target takes damage and its count is reduced by 1. Sinking differentiates itself by dealing SP damage instead of true damage. If the target doesn't have sanity, so deal gloom damage instead. The gloom damage part is especially important, as it can't be increased or decreased by any kind of status effect, such as fragility, or protection. Gloom resistance is the only thing that matters. Sinking also doesn't contribute to any kind of damage conditional, such as G Corp Gregor's heal 100% of damage dealt effect. I'm going to explain Echoes of the Mana before I cover anything else, as I'll be referencing it multiple times throughout this video. Echoes of the Mana is a non-cumulative effect, meaning you can't stack it, and inflicting it again will just replace the stack with a new value. As for what it does, inflicting sinking potency or count on a target with Echoes of the Mana has a 50% chance to inflict one additional count. This gives every sinking unit the chance to be count neutral or even positive. It also has a unique panic type. The issue is you'll only ever see it in normal fights, as almost every boss is immune to panic changing effects. If an enemy with Echoes of the Mana lacks sanity, they'll have an additional 10% chance to roll tails instead. This also applies to enemies that are immune to panic changing effects. There are only 3 sources of Echoes of the Mana in the entire game, the 2 Wuthering Heights Butlers and Bygone Days Ishmael's Corrosion. Moving on to the core of sinking. Either of the 2 Yisangs, Knight of Despair Rodion, Mola Boatworks Ishmael, and Butler Otis. Starting off with Solemn Lament Yisang, is one of the 2 ways for sinking to deal HP damage to enemies with sanity. It's through his status effect Butterfly. But before I explain Butterfly, I need to explain his ammo. He uses a unique type of ammo with potency and count. When the fight starts, he gains 10 potency and 10 count. When he runs out of ammo, he'll reload and gain potency and count based on his sanity, with increased odds for potency when he's below 0, and increased odds for count when he's at 0 or higher. When he spends ammo potency, he inflicts Butterfly potency, aka the living. When he spends ammo count, he inflicts Butterfly count, aka the departed. Butterfly also has its own potency and count, each doing 2 different things. When hit, the attacker heals sanity equal to Butterfly's potency, divided by 4. This gives the entire team a tiny bit of sanity support, but it's not the main appeal of Butterfly. Butterfly's main appeal is its secondary effect. When hit, if this unit's sanity is below 0, take gloom damage equal to sinking potency, divided by 5. This is one of the only ways for sinking to deal damage to enemies with sanity. The gloom damage per hit caps at 30, which isn't an issue because of how many coins the average sinking identity has. Butterfly also increases your sinking infliction for its 3rd effect. At turn end, set the departed to 0 and add the living's value to sinking its potency. Then, convert the living into the departed. So Butterfly's potency is effectively delayed sinking potency that you'll inflict at turn end. Solemn Lament as an ID is very solid. He's almost count positive with very high clashing power and burst damage from his 3rd skill. But on the other hand, we have Spicebush Yisang. Being a Season 2 identity, he's obviously going to be weaker. But he carries an extremely powerful effect known as Sinking Deluge. Sinking Deluge consumes all of the sinking on the target, both potency and count, and deals it as sanity damage, and any excess sanity damage is dealt instead as gloom damage. If the target doesn't have sanity, it will skip that step and deal it all as gloom damage. Sinking Deluge is the only thing giving Spicebush a purpose, and being the only way for sinking to deal damage against enemies with sanity, there's naturally been a lot of debate over which identity is better. And the answer is they're situational. If the thing you're fighting has multiple phases, then Spicebush is going to fall off, because any excess damage is just going to be voided and you'll lose your sinking stat. As an identity, he's not very good. His skill 2 is count negative, and his skill 1 is count neutral, but it applies sinking count next turn. Both of them are 3 coin skills, by the way. His skill 2 also has an attack rate conditional, but it needs 6 tremor. His skill 1 gives him 3 tremor, and tremor count is reduced by 1 every turn. So if he wants to activate that effect, he'll need to use his skill 1 3 times. His 9 rolling skill 1. So he's very good at quickly taking care of a boss with a single phase. But that's kind of it. His clashing isn't very good, rolling a 9 on his skill 1 and a 19 on his skill 2, compared to Solemn Lament's 15 and 21. So basically, use Spice Bush if you want to forward turn something with a single. Otherwise use Solemn Lament. If you do end up using Spice Bush, you need to bring the Knight Rodion along to speed up the process of building sinking on the target, as well as some kind of SP support ego because Spice Bush is not winning any clashes. Moving on to Rodion. Knight Rodion is the best sinking identity in the game, hands down, and a must-have for any sinking team. She has 2 stances, a defensive, potency-focused positive stance, and a defensive, count-focused negative stance. I'll only be talking about her offensive stance, because it's what you'll be using. Her offensive stance has 4 relevant effects: Despair, Tear Sharpened, Deep Tears, and Piercing Sword. Despair is given to Rodion when she's in her offensive stance. It enables her other effects and buffs her sinking count application, inflicting 1 sinking count on Clash Win and 1 sinking count with her first coin. For every minus 20 SP, she inflicts an additional 1 sinking count with both effects, capping at plus 2. She'll be at negative 40 sanity, by the way, meaning she'll be inflicting 3 count on Clash Win and 3 count on hit, for a total of 6 count. Despair also gives Rodion 1 piercing sword for every minus 8 SP at turn start. Tear Sharpen is what keeps her in her offensive stance. It generates 5 deep tears every turn and gives her a 10% damage buff to all of her base skills, as well as Pierce power up at turn start. It also reduces her SP by 15 at turn end, but don't worry about that, she can't drop below negative 40 sanity from it. You gain 1 Tear Sharpened every time you use Rodion's defensive skill, capping out at 3. Once you hit 3 stacks, your next base skill will consume all of them and become empowered, dealing 50% more damage with its final coin, as well as inflicting 3 additional sinking potency and count. So the idea is to stay at 2 stacks of Tear Sharpened and then counter the turn before you use Rodion's skill 3, as that's how you activate her reuse conditional. Deep Tears is Rodion's unique charge, and being honest, you really don't need to pay much attention to this. It basically manages itself. Rodion spends Deep Tears to deal more damage with her skills. She also gains Deep Tears from using her skills and the aforementioned Tear Sharpened effect. You're really never going to be low on the stuff. Last but not least, we have Piercing Sword. Piercing Sword gives Rodion 1 offense level up and reduces aggro per stack, which is cool but not why it's good. The real reason it's so useful is because of Rodion's passive. If this unit has 2+ Piercing Sword, consume all of it to inflict it as sinking potency. This is the main source of Rodion's insane infliction. Piercing Sword also manages itself, so the only thing you need to concern yourself with is making sure Rodion is at 2 to 3 stacks of Tear Sharpened. And that's not where it ends. Rodion has a third passive that just buffs her damage even more. She gets a 20% damage buff for being at negative 40 sanity, as well as gaining 2 damage up and 1 power up if she has 5 piercing swords at combat start. She's always going to have this passive active. She's always going to be at negative 40 sanity, skyrocketing her damage even more. And all you need to do to activate it is counter twice. That is literally it. Moving on to Mola Boatworks Ishmael. She's just a solid identity overall. Her main appeal is her count infliction, and the fact she's always going to be count neutral as long as the enemy has tremor, which isn't an issue because her skill 2 inflicts 3 turns worth of tremor count. She also uses self-tremor to inflict debuffs such as defense level down and fragile. Extremely simple unit but strong nonetheless. And lastly, Butler Otis. Butler Otis is a count negative unit with Clash Win conditionals, but she makes up for it with her 3 turns of Echoes of the Mana and her generally high DPS against enemies with sanity. Butler Faust can make for a decent substitute if you don't have Otis. She has less damage output but has better infliction. You can also run both Butlers for better Echoes uptime. As for the last 3 slots, there really isn't a lot of choice if I'm being honest, as most of Sinking's identities are on the same 3 Sinners. So you'll be running Wild Hunt Heathcliff for his high DPS and AoE, Edgar Gregor for his synergy with Solemn Lament and good damage, and either Arcorp or Diechi Honglu for the very last spot. Wild Hunt isn't particularly complex, 2 relevant status effects, Coffin and Dullahan. Wild Hunt gains Coughing whenever he kills something or uses skill 3. Coughing gives Heathcliff a stat boost, activates his AoE conditional on his skill 2, and buffs his skill 3 a lot. You can also revive a unit for a turn at the cost of 2 Coffins. Heathcliff gains Dullahan by using his counter. Dullahan buffs Heathcliff's speed and offense level, but reduces his defense level. The Dullahan status will increase by 1 at turn end, capping at 3. He also loses 15 sanity per turn as long as he's on Dullahan, but you can reduce the amount of sanity he loses by building coffin stacks, and the best way to build it is by using his skill 3-2, which you can activate by using his counter while he's on Dullahan and has more than 15 SP. It only takes 5 uses to reach max coffin, so by the midway point of a boss you'll be able to stay on Dullahan indefinitely. You can also negate staggers by mounting Dullahan. Edgar Gregor is just a solid damage dealer, with some good count on his skill 2, being 3 positive, along with his other skills inflicting sinking with each coin, having some synergy with Echoes of the Mana, which will have up most of the time on a sinking team. His skill 3 is a good setup tool, consuming 7 sinking potency in return for 3 damage up, 1+ coin power up next turn, with a 50% chance to gain the buff without consuming any potency. You can use his Solemn Lament Ego the following turn to do a pretty sizable amount of damage. His synergy with Solemn Lament, outside of fueling 3 of the 4 sins required, comes from his passive, which gives him 1 damage up and 1 fragile for every 5 SP difference between combat start and the previous turn, along with Solemn Lament's passive, giving him 1 power up if he has a negative status effect, such as fragile. Moving on to the last spot, there are actually 2 units. Unfortunately, they're both identities for the same sinner, Hong Lu. Arkup and Diechi Hong Lu. One is a charge sinking identity, the other is a discard sinking identity. Let's start with Arkup Hong Lu. Arkup Hong Lu, much like other charge identities, is all about getting stronger the longer the fight drags on. He gains 1 charge potency for every 10 charge count he consumes, and his sinking infliction and overall damage are increased based on how much charge potency he has. After he reaches 2 potency, he'll start inflicting 1 extra sinking potency for every 2 charge potency, capping out at +2, as well as dealing 5% more damage per charge potency, capping out at 25% more damage. His skills also have damage conditionals that scale on his charge potency. Avoid using his skill 2 unless you have at least 5 charge potency, otherwise it will be indiscriminate. And while Arkup isn't exactly the most count-friendly unit in the world, with Echoes of the Mana up, he can become count-neutral, and his skill 3 is count positive, at +3 sinking count. Now for the other contender, Diechi Hong Lu. Diechi Hong Lu's entire gimmick is discarding his skills in return for insight. A quick explanation of discarding insight. You know when you're selecting attacks, you can pick one of the 2 skills from your dashboard. Discarding basically deletes the skill you didn't pick. What you get in return for discarding varies from unit to unit, but in the Diechi's case, you get insight based on the rank of the skill you discarded. 1 insight for skill 1s, 2 insight for skill 2s, and 3 insight for skill 3s. Insight is used to activate certain conditionals, such as the reuse conditional Hong Lu's count neutral skill 1, making it go from a 1 coin skill 1 to a 3 coin skill 1, or giving his skill 3 coin power based on his insight. Diechi Hong Lu is very solid for a lot of reasons. He deals respectable damage, he has a count neutral skill 1, +1 count positive skill 3, and he doesn't take long to set up. Just discard 1 skill 3 and lock his bottom slot, that way you won't replace your 3 insight. But which one should you use? It honestly depends on what you're up against. Diechi is better at proccing sinking in Yisang's Butterfly. He also becomes a solid count applier if Echoes of the Mana is up. Arkup can be count neutral, but relies on a team to either make him count neutral or offset his negative impact. Damage-wise, Arkup has Diechi beat in any kind of long fight, with an insane amount of damage conditionals and just overall high rolling coins. But when it comes to ease of use, Diechi is undeniably easier to use. You can set him up as early as turn 1, provided you get a little lucky. Meanwhile, Arkup requires uptime 4 to make his skill 2 usable, and an ego if he wants to build up charge quickly. And lastly, Sin Affinities. Arkup is the only source of gluttony on a sinking team, and the only way to use egos such as Sun Shower. He also has an Envy Guard which we'll be using quite often, so Binds and Blind Obsession can be used a lot more frequently. So TLDR, Arkup is better for long fights and needs a full team. Diechi is better for short fights and can operate well without a team. Moving on to egos, I'd argue that sinking is one of, if not the least ego-reliant status effect in the game. There are 2 quote-unquote core egos. Ramshang and Bygone Days Yisang. Ramshang is very straightforward. 5 potency, 5 count on awakening, 10 potency, 8 count on corrosion. It's a good way of starting a stack early on with Superbia, but I feel nowadays its passive is what you should be using it for, given the fact Night Rodion exists. Bygone Days Yisang is interesting. For some reason its sinking is applied individually, rather than all at once, which means you have at least 6 chances for Echoes of the Mana to proc. Its passive also buffs Yisang's clashing power. Another good ego is Bygone Days Ishmael, particularly her corrosion, inflicting 2 Echoes of the Mana next turn, as well as inflicting its unique status effect, the Uninvited. The Uninvited makes the enemy take 0.5% more damage per sinking potency, capping out at 10% more damage. Bygone Days Ishmael also heals allies and boosts Ishmael's clashing power through its passive. And of course, Solemn Lament Gregor. 8 coins, 8 sinking procs, and a lot of synergy with Yisang's Butterfly. This ego is usually a finisher given how much count it eats up. With Night Rodion fielded, you can spam this ego a lot more. The reason this ego has so much synergy with Edgar Gregor is every time you reuse one of its coins, it costs Gregor a little sanity, blocking Edgar's passive. You can also use Gregor's skill 3 the turn before you use Solemn Lament for an extra 30% more damage. Edgar Gregor also benefits from Solemn Lament's passive, giving him 1 attack power up if he has a negative effect, such as Fragile, and dealing 50% more damage against targets in panic. Solemn Lament's corrosion is a decent AoE option, dealing more damage the further the target's sanity is from 0, scaling on sinking potency if the target doesn't have sanity, and dealing bonus gloom damage if the target's below 50%. Now, the next handful of egos I'm going to go over aren't necessarily sinking egos, but they boost the effectiveness of sinking units. Starting off with Sunshower Yisang. Sunshower is a very good support ego. The sloth damage up can set up a hard-hitting Solemn Lament skill 3, and the SP regen can proc Gregor's passive more often. The issue with this ego is the resource cost. It costs 1 Gluttony locking it behind Arc or Ponglu, as well as costing 3 Sloth, which is a sin sinking generates very slowly, so you won't be using it very often. Before the King in Binds can be stacked with Wild Hunt's high rolling skills to deal massive amounts of damage to hordes for relatively no cost, and given the fact Wild Hunt feels most of the ego, and Pride really isn't an issue within a sinking team, there's really no downside to using it often, plus its passive is pretty nice. Dimension Shredder Honglu. This ego is basically a requirement for Arcorp Honglu. It gives him 5 charge count and buffs his charge count through his passive. You can also do some funny shenanigans with Fell Bullet Yisang and Wild Hunt's Revive, which I won't get into, but I'll link Man's video showcasing it. Holiday Otis. It's just a solid SP heal. Sinking fuels it particularly well. You have an Otis fielded, so you might as well run it. Christmas Nightmare Ishmael. The self-tremor count is nice and helps with setting up Ishmael's free fragile skill 3. The thing is, it shares the same issue Sunshower has. It costs 1 Gluttony and 4 Sloth. Good ego, but you're only going to be using it in a story dungeon. Also regarding 100-footed Death Maggot Ishmael, it's really not worth using. Snag Harpoon has a better passive, rolls higher, costs less sanity and doesn't consume Sloth. Don't get me wrong, defense level down is nice, but you're not going to get that much out of it. In ideal conditions where the target has Bind and Power down from Ramshank's passive, Ruin from Heathcliff's skill 2, Butterfly from Yisang, Echoes of the Mana, Quinn Power down from Gregor's skill 3, Tremor, and Ishmael has self-tremor. And for the sake of the argument, let's give Ishmael attack power down and rupture. Let's say there's a Gloomrose up. That's 15 centipede venom, which translates to 3 defense level down, or roughly 1 fragile. And then the stat gets halved, giving you even less defense level down. As for Death Maggot's passive, Mola only inflicts sinking once, with the exception of her skill 3, so we're getting 5 offense level up, once per rotation. That's not very good. So yeah, Snag Harpoon is unfortunately just better. Okay, support passives. For Faust, you want to run her base ID. Butler's support passive is always going to target Night Rodion, which is the complete opposite of what we want. For Dawn, run Warp Dawn if you have her, otherwise use Base Dawn because you're only going to have Yisang in slot 1 anyways. Haisha Ryoshu is your only option here, but you're required to run Arcorp Honglu if you want to activate it. Anyways, Musou has 3 support IDs, Arcorp, Middle and Base. You'll be running Arcorp Musou if you have Arcorp Honglu fielded. Arcorp Musou and Honglu don't count unique charge as charge, when it comes to their passives, so Honglu is always going to receive Mersault's speed boost, which can be helpful if you want to apply Fragile using his Dimension Shredder. Middle Mersault can give Wild Hunt a nice sanity boost if there's a Wuthering Heights battler on field with him. The only issue is if you have Knight Rodion, the sanity buff will be given to her instead. So I recommend Middle Mersault for players who might be lacking Walpurgis IDs. You shouldn't go out of your way to charge for him as he's falling out of most team comps. And lastly, Base Mersault. There really isn't much to say. He gives the unit with the most HP 10% damage reduction. It will usually go to Knight Rodion, and if you don't have her, it will go to Wild Hunt instead. Here's a flowchart I made to help you decide which Mersault to use. Last in room without any competition is Mariachi Sinclair. Mariachi Sinclair is just another damage modifier to the ally with the most SP. Alright, final section, team comps. I'm going to split this into two segments. I'll go over what a new player should use first, and then the best team comp. If you only care about the best team, you can skip to this timestamp. Okay, so when you're starting out, it's less about maintaining a status, and more about having good DPS, so this is the team I'd advise new players to use. Wild Hunt Heathcliff for his high burst damage and on-demand skill free. You want to build coffins as soon as you can, as they boost his damage exponentially, so the moment Heathcliff has high sanity, counter to mount his horse, and then counter again to use his skill free. Do keep in mind that he'll only activate his skill free if you clash with an enemy. Butler Faust and Otis for Echoes of the Manor is going to be very important for maintaining count. Remember to reapply when there's only one stack left on the target. Otis can stay at Uptide 3, but I highly recommend getting Faust to Uptide 4, as it makes her a lot more reliable when it comes to clashes and potency infliction. You want to bring Edgar Gregor along for his high damage, and the fact he's plus 3 count positive on his skill 2. Don't really have a way to activate his sanity passive, but that's fine, he still has good damage output without it. Keep in mind that both Gregor and Butler Otis need to win clashes. If you use them to attack unopposed, they quickly become count negative. Mola Ishmael is never going to be count negative as long as the target has Tremor, which is almost always, since she inflicts free Tremor count with her skill 2. Absolutely core in a unit you should prioritize getting. And lastly, Diechi Honglu. Honglu's just very solid and easy to play. He's very good at activating Sinking, with up to 3 coins on his count neutral skill 1, and 3 coins on his count positive skill 3. Again, Echoes of the Manor can make his skill 1 very count positive. As stated before, you want to discard a skill 3, and lock his bottom slot as soon as you have high sanity. That way he stays locked at 3 insight. His skill 2 can kill your stack, but Sinking produces a lot of gloom, so you can just use Honglu's base ego and lock the now bottom slot skill 2. Okay, now the team you'll probably be using. You want Solemn Lament in slot 1 to make the most out of Butterfly. Knight Rodion in slot 2 to get the stack up quickly and for Rhymeshank's passive. Otis in slot 3. You can swap her out of Gregor if you want to buff Solemn Lament through binds. Just place her after him and move the team down by 1. Heathcliff in slot 4. Honglu in slot 5. If he's fast enough, Dimension Shredder can be used for on-demand Fragile. Gregor in slot 6. And Ishmael in slot 7. There's also an alternative team for Tidal Elegy Ishmael nuking. Solomon on slot 1, Knight on slot 2, Mola on slot 3, Otis on slot 4, Heathcliff on slot 5, Honglu in slot 6, and Gregor in slot 7. This team is built around setting up a nuke turn and dropping it on a staggered enemy. So the strategy is, preparation turn, use Heathcliff's Bind's Corrosion to gut Ishmael's speed, and give her a damage boost next turn. Use Ishmael's Bygone Days Awakening to inflict the uninvited on the enemy. So now Yisang, Ishmael and Rodion are all extremely slow. On the nuke turn, use Bygone Days Gregor to inflict 4 Gloom Fragility on the target, and Holiday Otis to boost Ishmael's sanity back up. And if you want to be extra, you can also throw in Dimension Shredder Honglu for 1 Fragile. And then you use Tidal Elegy Ishmael to nuke the target, resulting in the enemy taking 130% more damage. Is it excessive and unnecessary? Yes. Is it funny? Yeah, I think so at least. Anyways, I think that's all for this guide. If you have any opinions to share, please comment them. I hope you have a good rest of your day.